Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I am Ladi Akiriduluale. The headlines. G20 foreign ministers meet in Bali today with Russia's war in Ukraine and its impact on food and energy security high on the agenda. Australia's Foreign Minister Penny Wong asks China to exert its influence on Russia to halt the war in Ukraine. And Irish Prime Minister Michael Martin visits Ukrainian President Zelensky in Kiev, says there will be no hiding places for those committing war crimes. We begin with the program with news on the group of 20. That's the G20 meeting set to hold in Indonesia's Bali Island later on today. We are learning that security has been heightened as foreign ministers descend on the tropical island for the two-day meeting. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has flown in for the gathering, which is said to be overshadowed by tensions triggered by the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Discussions about energy and food security will also feature on the agenda, with Russia accused of stoking a global food crisis and worsening inflation by blockading shipments of Ukrainian grain. Russia has said it is ready to facilitate unhindered exports of grain. A senior U.S. State Department official has said that the meeting cannot be business as usual due to the situation in Russia. The United States wants to make sure nothing from the G20 lends legitimacy to what Russia is doing in Ukraine, and that's according to the official, adding that the meeting would be a good opportunity to drive the food security agenda forward. In Bali ahead of the G20 foreign ministers meeting, Australia's Foreign Minister Penny Wong has said that Russia's war on Ukraine was illegal, unjust and immoral. Ms. Wong also emphasized that strengthening multilateralism as well as food and energy security themes would be discussed at the G20 meeting. Her remarks came following a recent meeting between Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese with Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky in Kiev, where the Australian Prime Minister had said that Australia will give duty-free access to Ukrainian goods and impose sanctions and travel bans on 16 more Russian ministers and oligarchs.
Addressing food energy security, which the foreign ministers meeting will be addressing tomorrow, really do bring into highlight the implications and the impacts of Russia's illegal, unjust and immoral war on Ukraine. If you ever wanted an example of a nation which has chosen to denigrate and weaken multilateralism, if you ever want an example of a nation which has demonstrated its willingness, its disregard for the need for food security for a world recovering from a pandemic, it is Russia. And it is Russia in its persistent refusal to comply with the UN Charter and international law and its illegal, immoral invasion of Ukraine.
Irish Prime Minister Michael Martin says that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is a gross violation of international law and that there would be no hiding places for those committing war crimes. He made these comments during his visit to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kiev. Zelensky had said he discussed with Mr. Martin the preparation of the 7th package of sanctions against the Russian Federation, as well as a common response to the issues created by war. Mr. Martin also visited several cities in the Kiev region, such as Bucha and Brodyanka, that were affected by the Russian invasion. He said that Ireland welcomed almost 40,000 Ukrainians fleeing the war and that they are welcome to stay for as long as needed.
I'm here, first of all, to express Ireland's solidarity with the government and people of Ukraine. We admire you and we are with you. Russia's brutal war against this beautiful democratic country is a gross violation of international law. The use of terror against and the deliberate targeting of civilian populations are war crimes. Those responsible, those carrying out these actions and those directing them will be held fully accountable, and there will be no hiding places. Although we are on either side of the continent, Irish people have been enormously moved by the suffering of the people of Ukraine. You are very much in our hearts. Every Irish town and city is a sea of yellow and blue. We have welcomed almost 40,000 Ukrainians fleeing the war. They are welcome to stay in Ireland for as long as they need to. Our home is your home, but we do know that they want to come home, and you want them back as quickly as possible also. And we will work with you in terms of reconstruction and so forth.
The mayor of Mykolaiv has reported heavy shelling in the southern port city and said air alarms were also activated several times this morning. The city has already shed about half of its pre-war population of 500,000. Alexander Senkevich told a briefing that there are no more safe areas in Mykolaiv, as he stresses that the people need to leave. Meanwhile, Russian Defense Ministry spokesperson Igor Konashenkov says that Russian forces had destroyed 2 high-mobility artillery rocket systems in Ukraine. Mr. Konashenkov said that the rocket systems were destroyed near the Ukrainian village of Malotriavka near Kramatorsk. Mr. Konashenkov also said that a radio station for the Ukrainian-operated S-300 air defense system, along with a camp housing foreign mercenary units, was also destroyed in the Limany area of Mykolaiv. President Vladimir Putin warns the United States in an interview in June that Russia would strike new targets if the West supplied longer-range missiles to Ukraine for use in high-precision mobile rocket systems. Ukraine's general staff, however, rejected Russia's account, saying that the claims were fake and that it was using the U.S.-supplied HIMARS to inflict devastating blows on Russian forces. All right, there's breaking news, of course, out of London, 2 of them, in fact. The first is that former Deputy Senate President Ike Ekweremadu is expected in court today. Today's July the 7th, and of course we're having updates on the stories coming out of the British government, the mass resignations from Prime Minister Boris Johnson's government. So let's go to the Westminster Magistrates Court, where we have Juliana Olayinka reporting for us live. Good morning to you, Juliana. What is the situation first with Senator Ike Ekweremadu's case?
Good morning, Laddie. Good morning, as you quite rightly said, from Westminster Magistrates Court, where a really gripping hearing is due to take place in the next few minutes. Just a couple of seconds ago, there was a very large delegation. I don't know if you can see some scragglers behind me. I believe some of them did include senators that came into London last week to rally around the former Deputy Senate President, Ike Ekweremadu, and his wife, Beatrice, who have been detained by British police over the past couple of weeks on allegations of human trafficking and organ harvesting under the Modern Slavery Act. Last week, Thursday, there was a very fast-tracked trial. I was in court that day. There was a strong show of support, predominantly from the Nigeria High Commission here in the UK. And now, I believe today, we could either see the senator walk out of these courts and head to Nigeria, where he will face the courts there, or he could be once again remanded into custody. There are so many layers, so much context to this story. I know the team in Lagos and Abuja have been covering it extensively, but it has gripped a lot of people here. So there are no surprises that just behind me, a couple of local community members have rallied together. There are signs of a demonstration. Some of the boards I can't show because they're too explicit, but it's certainly gripped not just people in Nigeria, but also the Nigerian community here in London, and hopefully I'll be getting into the court where I can follow proceedings, and I'll be able to update Channels TV accordingly.
Is there anything further that we know about the young man in this case who was referenced as being the reason why Senator and Mrs. Ekweremadu were arrested?
Well, of course, I don't want to be in breach of court, so I can't go into too much detail about this allegedly 15-year-old individual. But to repeat, much of what has been disclosed that we know is what we believe to be accurate is that this 15-year-old individual was taken off the streets of Lagos by a criminal gang for the purpose of organ harvesting. I believe the senator and his wife have a very ill child. They wanted to use this individual's organs to try and keep her alive, which, you know, if done accurately and done properly, that is legal. You are able to donate your organs, but age and consent was the key issue. So once this individual did arrive into London, there were consultations at the Royal Free Hospital in East London, and it's there that consultants said something is not right. They didn't believe that this individual was the age on his documents. They didn't believe that he did consent to donating his organs, and from there he fled the Ekweremadu residence. He was homeless for 3 days. I believe there are some text messages that the prosecution have seen which do appear to corroborate part of what this individual was saying. But then jurisdiction is a big issue, Laddie, and I think that's what is going to be the catalyst of today's story. Is this something that is going to be tried in England and Wales, or will it be tried in Nigeria? I know the Ekweremadu lawyers in Nigeria are trying to clarify that actually this isn't a child. This guy is well above the age that the British police are alleging, but we would just have to wait and see. Again, there are so many layers and nuances involving this case, and hopefully if I am able to get into the court, I'll be able to hear further details, and of course, like I said, I will be reporting it back.
Indeed, we will be expecting you to report back, and we'll be keeping in close touch. But there is another issue, one which has also gripped attention in Britain and around the world, and that is what is happening with Prime Minister Boris Johnson's government. I believe yesterday evening, it was the count of resignations was 38, comprising of ministers, junior ministers, senior aides, and all of that. What's happening this morning, and how was his appearance in the House of Commons yesterday viewed by the public and the political elite?
Well, unprecedented and extraordinary are terms that we've been using to describe Boris Johnson's tenure over the past couple of years, but truly those are the only terms I can use to describe what's been happening over the past 24 hours. You mentioned 38. I think you'll have to add an extra 12 ministers to that. The last time I checked, there were about 50 ministerial resignations, including, and this is really crucial, the Welsh Secretary and the Northern Ireland Secretary, Brandon Lewis. They have both handed in their resignations this morning. We talk about the House of Commons, but let's fast forward to the Parliamentary Liaison Committee, where Prime Minister Boris Johnson had a gruelling 2-hour session. And I've got to tell you, Laddie, at times it was really uncomfortable to watch. You know, you're talking about who was once a political titan, an 80-seat majority, being ripped to shreds for 24 hours on British TV. And Laddie, you know better than me just how brutal this British media can be. But the Prime Minister is not going to be moved. He has refused to resign, even whilst he was in that liaison committee session. Some of the cross-party MPs who were around the horseshoe were updating him on resignations via Twitter. They were saying, look, Prime Minister, when you get out of this building, you have your loyalists, your cabinet ministers, including the Chancellor, who was just appointed a few hours earlier, waiting for you at number 10 Downing Street, telling you you must resign. And what happened? The Prime Minister didn't resign. Number 10 is locked shut. He wants to get on with trying to sort out the issues that are affecting the country, one of them being we're going through the worst cost of living crisis in a generation. And supposedly he will be doing a joint statement with the new Chancellor, Nadine Zahawi, later today. But then overnight we've had these serious ministerial resignations. Now, one of the members of the delegations who were waiting at number 10 to ask the Prime Minister to do the right thing and resign was the Home Secretary, Priti Patel. She hasn't resigned just yet, and people are saying she cannot resign because it will be a national state of emergency. How can the Home Secretary resign? The Northern Ireland Secretary resign? Who is going to make sure the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed when it comes to MI5 and MI6? These are really crucial questions. At the moment, there is no functioning government in the United Kingdom. I was speaking on The World Today yesterday with Tenny, and I did say I have never felt this level of political anxiety or a political vacuum in the country since the result of the Brexit referendum in 2016. That's how tense it is. And unfortunately for the Prime Minister, Britain is a laughing joke at the moment. And just very quickly, Laddie, the Minister of Courts has also resigned. So if the Minister of Courts has also resigned, how does this fare with the Ekweremadu case today, particularly as it's so diplomatically sensitive?
There's so much there, Juliana. As I listen to you, the word unprecedented comes to mind, but then Boris Johnson doesn't appear to be the kind of man who came this far in his political career by folding and leaving, but just because people said he should. He's very thick-skinned, and we'll just have to see how this plays out. But we'll stay in touch with you all through the course of the day for updates, particularly on the Senator Ekweremadu case and the possible outcome. Will he be coming back to face trial in Nigeria, or will he be staying back in the United Kingdom? And then, of course, the other things relating to Prime Minister Boris Johnson. So a busy day ahead, it looks like for you, Juliana, but you're used to it. Thank you for your time this morning. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that his troops have been able to inflict noticeable damage on Russian targets using Western artillery. Speaking in his nightly address, Mr. Zelensky said that the Western weapons have finally started working very powerfully. Its accuracy is exactly as needed. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said he had spoken with his German and U.S. counterparts, where he noted the importance of continuing military aid was discussed. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll be continuing with our focus on the issue of recognition or non-recognition of certificates, medical degrees from Ukraine in Nigeria. We'll get the U.S. perspective with Maria Bird. Please stay on with us. As well as inflation hitting a record high week on week in Russia. Welcome back. Thanks for staying tuned. Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv, is being subjected to constant, longer-range Russian shelling, and that's according to its mayor. Ihor Terekov said on Ukrainian TV that Russia is trying to demoralize Kharkiv, but it won't get anywhere. Ukraine's defenders pushed Russian armored vehicles well back from Kharkiv early in the war, and Terekov said about 1 million residents remain there. Mr. Zelensky, that's the Ukrainian president, had said that the National Pedagogical University in Kharkiv was destroyed by a Russian missile raid with impact on the main building, lecture halls, university museum, and scientific library. South of Kharkiv, the governor of Dnipropetrovsk says the region had been battered by missiles and shelling. Let's talk, as promised, just before the break now with our correspondent in Washington, D.C., Maria Bird, about this medical certificates issue emanating from the war in Ukraine. Good morning to you, Maria.
Good morning.
What is the situation? Because I know that some of the students, at least some of them, who fled the war in Ukraine, are headed for the United States, and this problem is probably a universal one. So, what do you know about what's being done in the United States with reference to recognition or non-recognition of certificates of these students when eventually they graduate?
Yes, that's a very key issue here in the U.S. And the U.S. receives tons, the U.S. universities receive a ton of transcripts and certificates from various countries across the world. But specifically, as we look at Ukraine, it still has to go through the State Department and Department of Education's review and evaluation process to see if it meets the criteria in order to be recognized here in the U.S. As a whole, most Ukrainian universities obviously have been through some tumultuous times, and as you mentioned before, most of this was done prior to individuals leaving Ukraine earlier this year, and so many of those universities were still intact if you look at them prior to the beginning of the war. And so you will have some individuals that will receive credit for some of their credentials, but even without the war, some universities and institutions and certificates in Ukraine would have not been recognized here in the U.S. So it's a case-by-case basis. But the U.S. has committed to helping Ukraine. Just here recently, a constituency of American Universities Association has worked with President Zelensky and discussed how they can assist Ukraine with their global university, which they stood up here right shortly after the war began. And so the U.S. is committed to providing support for higher education programming within Ukraine.
We are talking about doctors here, mainly in many instances, and even possibly I could assume that there might have been one or two United States citizens who, in fact, are involved in this or caught up in this. And you talk about providing support for them. But do you think, or do you know if this support actually extends to dealing with this kind of matters when it comes to recognition of certificates and providing assistance for people who are caught up due to no fault of theirs, because these recognitions are done by independent bodies outside of government?
So the physicians that you're speaking of directly would have to go before what we have as the MCAT boards here. And those certifying bodies would have to then review the coursework for those individuals who have gone through medical training in Ukraine to see as if their training meets the guidelines. And in addition to that, there are boards that individuals have to pass. There are several series of medical boards that have to be passed here in the U.S. And so those medical boards would have to be passed for anyone that comes here to the U.S., and specifically those individuals who are coming from Ukraine who might have completed their medical training through a formal university setting, a medical school setting. They would then need to take on those boards to see if they can then pass those. What you typically see here in the U.S. is that oftentimes the credits and the actual degree will be verified and accepted, but those medical boards, and many times you'll see individuals might have to go back to an institution here in the U.S. to receive additional training if they're not able to pass those boards.
Anytime I have you on the program, I can't help asking you to update us on the situation in terms of the economics and the politics in the United States. First, the economics. I know that, like other countries, the United States is dealing with very, very high cost of living, particularly high energy prices, and this has fed into the political narrative ahead of the midterm elections in November. What's the update on that?
You're exactly correct. As we know, the U.S. stock market has been very volatile over the past few days, months, to be very honest. And what we're seeing now is, as you mentioned, an increase in energy. We're seeing that oil prices have drastically declined, which has investors very concerned that potentially we will see a reduction in the consumption of energy, which really leads to what many are presuming could be the beginnings of a recession. Now, the chairman of the Federal Reserve has been very clear that he is going to do everything he can to fight inflation. The challenge is, though, is he going to be able to fight inflation without causing a recession? We've had a pretty strong jobs market here in the U.S. over the past few months, but that is seeming to be potentially going to flatline as well. And so the economic situation on inflation has not been able to be brought down. It is a very tough fight between the Federal Reserve and the actual economic structure that exists.
Indeed. And how is President Joe Biden faring now? Because I know that all of this is putting into some form of uncertainty his plans, the Build Back Better, for example, initiative is stuck in Congress because it's been opposed by many Republicans. And he might have been looking forward to the midterm elections to change that, particularly in the Senate. But that doesn't, all the opinion polls I've read don't seem to think that he might be able to get that this November.
You know, this November is going to be extremely tough, as you've mentioned, the myriad of challenges that exist. He just yesterday released a plan to assist union workers. We know that union workers are one of the strongest bases for the Democratic Party. If he's able to put forth a plan that really resonates to union workers and to individuals who are what we would consider your traditional middle-class American, then maybe he'll get some additional support. But as it stands right now, many union workers and those who are in the middle of the road in the American economic structure are the ones that are greatly suffering. And so will we see them show up for Democrats during the midterm elections? And I think that's going to be key and critical just because so many middle-class Americans have been disenfranchised recently. And the reality is that the U.S. is really moving toward an economic system that either you are able to financially afford and have, or you are moving toward the lower end of the economic structure. And so we're really seeing a shrinking piece in the middle class, which is going to drastically impact how we see these midterm elections faring out. We're also seeing that Republicans are beginning to become a little bit wiser as it relates to gun safety laws, as it relates to some of these very key issues that all Americans are concerned about. And as we are seeing more bipartisan support of very key challenges that America is facing, you will then see the Republican Party continue to have some support. And so I think that the Democratic Party is going to have a tough road ahead for midterm elections, but it's going to be very key and critical for President Biden to continue with a lot of the work he's done with foreign relations in the U.S. and also continuing to find ways to support those middle-class individuals and to bring forth efforts and ways to bring back the economy to a stable point.
Indeed, we'll watch that very closely. Maria, thank you for your reporting. We'll be back to you in short order to find out what the update is. Do have a good day ahead.
Have a good day as well.
Just before we go on, there's breaking news out of the British capital, London, where it has been reported that Prime Minister Boris Johnson is to resign as leader of the Conservatives later on today, but he will continue as Prime Minister of the country until the autumn. A Conservative leadership race will take place this summer, and a new PM will be in place in time for the Tory party conference in October. As we have been reporting earlier on, more than 50 ministers and other officials of the Prime Minister's government had resigned over the last 24 hours, including the Treasury Secretary, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, and the Secretary of Health, Sajid Javid, who started all of this yesterday morning. But the news once more is that Prime Minister Boris Johnson is to resign as leader of the Conservative Party later on today, but he will continue as Prime Minister of the country until the autumn. There will be a race for the Prime Ministership this summer, and a new Prime Minister is expected to be in place by October of 2022. We'll bring you more on that as we get it. But back to our stories here. Ukraine says it is investigating more than 21,000 war crimes and crimes of aggression allegedly committed by Russia since the start of its invasion. The Prosecutor General, Irina Venediktova, says she was receiving reports of between 200 to 300 war crimes a day, and admitted that many trials will be held in absentia, but stressed that it was a question of justice to continue with the prosecutions. Russia invaded Ukraine on the 24th of February this year, but denies all war crime allegations. In May, Ms. Venediktova said about 600 suspects had already been identified and 80 prosecutions had begun. The first Russian soldier to be put on trial in Ukraine, Sergeant Vadim Shishmarin, was sentenced to life in prison for killing a civilian in May. Turkey has renewed requests for Sweden and Finland to extradite individuals it considers terrorists after the countries reached a deal over the Nordic nations' NATO membership bid. The Justice Minister Bekir Bozdağ made this known. Turkey had opposed the two countries' bids over what it called support for Kurdish militants and others it views as terrorists, as well as over arms embargoes and unfulfilled extradition requests. Last week, the three nations signed a deal for Ankara to remove its bloc, while the candidate countries pledged not to support the Kurdish militant PKK and YPG groups, or the network of US-based cleric Fethullah Gulen. Ankara says the Gulen network staged a 2016 coup attempt and labels it a terrorist organization with the acronym FETÖ. In the text signed last week, Finland and Sweden agreed to address Turkey's pending deportation or extradition requests of terror suspects expeditiously and thoroughly in accordance with the European Convention on Extradition. Turkey, a NATO member of more than 70 years standing with the alliance's second biggest army, has long demanded that allies halt support for the YPG, a U.S. ally in the fight against Islamic State in Syria. It has repeatedly traded barbs with the United States, France, Germany, the Netherlands, and others over the matter. The trial in Russia of U.S. basketball player Brittany Griner is due to continue today as she faces drug charges that could see her sentenced to 10 years in jail in a case that highlights the already fraught relations between Moscow and Washington. Griner, a star player in the U.S.-based Women National Basketball Association, was detained at Moscow's Sheremetyevo airport on February the 17th, just days before Russia invaded Ukraine, unleashing a broader confrontation with the West. Her trial formally began on July the 1st at a court on the outskirts of Moscow. Russian authorities said the 31-year-old was carrying vape cartridges containing hashish oil, a substance illegal in the country. She was charged with smuggling a large quantity of drugs, an offense that can carry up to 10 years. Griner's detention prompted concerns that Moscow could use the two-time Olympic gold medalist to negotiate the release of a high-profile Russian in U.S. custody.
I did have the opportunity to speak with Ms. Griner in the courtroom. She is doing as well as can be expected in these difficult circumstances, and she asked me to convey that she is in good spirits and is keeping up the faith. The Russian Federation has wrongfully detained Ms. Griner. Wrongful detention is unacceptable wherever it occurs, and it endangers the safety of everyone traveling, living, working, studying abroad. I can assure you that the United States government at the very highest levels is working very hard to bring Ms. Griner, as well as all wrongfully detained U.S. citizens, safely home.
Russia's parliament has rushed through two bills imposing strict controls on the economy, requiring businesses to supply goods to the armed forces and obliging employees at some firms to work overtime. Once signed into law by President Vladimir Putin, the bills will allow the government to introduce special economic measures during what the Kremlin calls its special military operation in Ukraine. After being passed on their first reading, Duma Speaker Vyacheslav Volodin said further discussions would be held behind closed doors due to national security. According to one of the drafts, the state will be able to purchase goods and services necessary for conducting military special operations from a single supplier without the need of a competitive tender. In addition, businesses will be required by law to supply goods and services necessary for conducting the special military operation to the armed forces. A second bill mandates the government to require employees of certain enterprises producing goods and services needed by the Russian military to work overtime. Let's talk now and get the Indian perspective to the issue of medical certificates and their recognition or lack thereof with Nirja Yadav, who is a fifth-year medical student in Rajasthan in India. It's nice to have you on the program. Thanks for joining us. I read somewhere. Yes, I read somewhere that in India it's a bit different. The rules, at least as at March 2022, were that if you left India to go study medicine or medical inspired courses, you had to stay in one institution and finish there. You weren't allowed to switch from one institution to the other or even come back to India. But you're in India now, and I assume you're affected by this. What has happened?
Yes, there is a rule that we cannot take the transfer while we are studying outside, but this rule applies to the students who have taken admission in 2021 year. But for me, like, I have taken admission in 2019, so I am allowed to take the transfer to other universities. But the problem is that our university is not giving us transcripts. So actually, we cannot take transfer to any other university.
So given that, I mean, the Indian authorities have relaxed this previous rule, but now the problem is of a different nature in the sense that just like the Nigerians who were in Ukraine, you can't get hold of your transcripts, and no institution is likely to take you without that document.
Yes, and there is only one condition. That the university is asking us that we should write the application to expel ourselves from the college. And this option, I think, is not good because being expelled is something very different.
Yes, because being expelled, being expelled is a disciplinary action for someone who has done something wrong.
Yes. So if we get expelled also, I don't think if the other university will be ready to accept us in their university. So it's very risky to give them this application.
So what exactly are you doing now, given this situation? What are you doing? What have you been doing?
We have requested here the Indian government to allow us to take admission in the Indian medical colleges, or even to give us permission to perform observership here in the Indian hospitals. But still now there is no any decision being made yet. The Indian government has allowed only the final year students who are studying in their 6th year in the final year that they can continue their study online, and after doing online, they need to pass the Indian exam for the medical license, and then they need to do 2 years internship in India. But for students like me in 3rd, 4th, 5th year, still there is no any decision. So we just have one option to attend our classes online, which I think because we are becoming a doctor, we need offline practice also.
So, I mean, if you are in final year, if I get what you said properly, if you're in the final year, you're allowed to continue and finish. But if you're in any other year other than your final year, you have this hurdle to cross.
Yes, there is no any decision by the Indian government yet on third, fourth, fifth year students.
But you as a fifth-year medical student right now, are you just sitting at home, or you're joining an active group to get the government to change its mind or to do something in your favor? What exactly are you doing?
All the students who have come from the Ukraine, we all are requesting the government, and we are also writing application to many higher authorities. And the decision was supposed to come on 28 June, but the court has extended the date. So now on 8th July, the Indian Supreme Court will give its decision on our future.
The Indian
so
Supreme Court?
Yes.
The Indian Supreme Court will give a decision on your future on the 8th, which is tomorrow.
Yes. Yes, for the third, fourth, and fifth year students.
And what are you hoping that decision will be?
I hope it comes in favor. Either we get admission or we get the permission to do observership here.
And if that happens, you won't be going back naturally to Ukraine. You'll just complete your studies back in India and stay back.
Yes. Or one other option we have, that if the Indian embassy could help us to get our transcripts from our university, so we can also have this option to take transfer to any other university in other countries.
So if you were given a choice, would you rather stay back in India and complete this, or would you rather go back to not Ukraine, another country where, you could do it?
I think both options are good for me, but the education process in Ukraine and the education process in India are very different. In Ukraine, we are studying this course for 6 years, while in India, this course is only for 4.5 years. So yes, taking transfer to other universities that have the same curriculum of studies, I think it will be a good option for us.
Well, one can only say that because there are so many of you who have this challenge, and this Supreme Court decision is coming tomorrow. Like you, I hope it goes your way, and you're able to exercise the options. Thank you very much, Nija Yadav, for your time this morning from Rajasthan in India. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
And still ahead on the news, we'll have the unpacking of the business stories out of this situation. Plus, Lithuania donates a crowd-funded drone to Ukraine. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Laddie Williams joins me on the program at this point to unpack some of the leading business stories out of this conflict. Morning. Europe will count natural gas and nuclear as green energy in some circumstances.
Right.
Is this
some circumstances?
Is this hypocrisy or is this panic?
Well, it's when you have to choose between the devil and the deep blue sea, then you start making, these kind of options. And we've seen how, these gas issues in Europe, how it's impacting the economy. See how Russia's, planning on turning off the taps, of gas to Europe. And at the end of the day, they have to make plans. And we've seen them, contemplate using dirtier, options. And now we know how dirty, coal is, for generating electricity. We've seen them, consider that. But at the end of the day, these countries have, pledges for net zero, emissions
by 2050 and 2060.
Exactly. And now they've been hit with this, unprecedented issue with Russia turning off, gas to Europe. So at the end of the day, they're saying, we're going to add, nuclear power and natural gas into our green, list for special circumstances. Like what we're seeing right now, this is quite special. Not having gas to
not having gas is quite special. Yes.
Yeah, quite special. So we know natural gas still emits about 58% of, carbon dioxide as much as coal, and though nuclear power, not that much emission from there, but the issues they have with that is when it comes to storage,
yes,
some of these
safety.
Radioactive substances. So at the end of the day, Europe, they have to make a tough choice at this point. They're not going to be getting gas from Russia the way it's looking, because we see Russia is planning to turn off that Nord Stream 1, pipeline for maintenance,
yes.
and we know what could happen,
yes,
as
a
from
result
that
of the maintenance.
So they're making plans right now. They're doing all they can to make sure that, the gas they have now, can take them through the winter, trying to get as much in there in the storage. At the same time, because when there's a shortage, prices will go up. So they're also trying to, create a buffer for, German consumers and, Europe at large, to make sure that the cost is not passed on. That will also stoke inflation. We're seeing inflation at new highs, even in the Eurozone.
Right.
So at the end of the day, they have a tough choice to make, and it remains to be seen. It's still a vote at this point. We'll see how that vote plays out, because they have a legal obligation to be neutral, carbon neutral by 2050.
Now, Sri Lanka is asking Russia to provide it fuel and help its tourist industry by resuming aviation flights.
Exactly, because Sri Lanka is having some deep economic woes, at this point. And Sri Lanka depends on Russia and Ukraine for most of their tourist business, because they get a lot of tourists from both countries, and with both countries at war, they're not getting that much tourists, at this time. So, and they also have energy shortage, right? There they have food problems. Their debt level is
very, very high.
Very high, and they've also defaulted in, one of their sovereign debt obligations. And at the end of the day, they're dealing with a lot right now. So the president is asking, Putin, can we have some, fuel at this point?
Fuel and some tourists.
I know you have your problems right now, but we need...
Ours is just a bit more than yours.
Yeah, because our people, cannot move around anymore. We're having to ration, fuel, and for such an economy, it's a big blow. And still not getting, those tourists from, Russia and Ukraine is also, because that's that's a big source of revenue for, a country like Sri Lanka. So at the end of the day, it remains to be seen if Putin would actually loan them this. And I wonder how, the U.S. and allies will see this, because,
yeah, that's another part of this.
Yeah, you're begging the enemy at this point for...
Well, Russia, well, depending on how Sri Lanka sees it.
Exactly.
But speaking about Russia itself, for the first time in a bit, inflation is going up.
Yeah.
In spite of the fact that all along Russia was headed this way while everybody else was headed in the other direction.
We saw them bringing their rates down when the whole world is actually raising rates. And at the end of the day, we're seeing the ruble actually weaken. At this point, it went from about 50 to dollar to now about 60 something. It's down about 9%, from the last time. We saw them try to, bring down some of those capital controls, because that's what has, propped the ruble so high. But at the end of the day, we're seeing, inflation start to show itself again in their economy. We don't take this data for granted, because that could be a sign of, what's to come, for the Russian economy. So at the end of the day, we've seen them, calm down on some of those capital controls. So we're seeing the ruble actually weaken, which is what they wanted. But analysts are saying it might actually get to 80 rubles to a dollar with the way,
the way it's going.
Yeah, at this point. So it remains to be seen what the monetary policy would, the central bank would, put forward next at the next meeting, because now the inflation is getting higher than their targets at this point. And if that carries on, they might have to tighten again. But it remains to be seen how, it plays out, because at the end of the day, they don't need inflation, going up in their country at this point, because they're having to deal with a lot of, financial sanctions, globally.
So to add inflation to all of that.
Add inflation, which, will happen, because the whole world is going through it at this point. So they have a lot to decide.
Now, here's something that affects us. Brent has slipped under $100 a barrel.
Yeah.
As you predicted on Monday.
Yes.
What's responsible for that?
So at the end of the day, it's still recession fears. That's what's pushing sentiment in the market right now, because if there's a recession, demand for oil is going to go down, and obviously when demand goes down, prices will go down. So we're seeing, traders already price all of that in, trying to dump all of that oil at this point, because I told you one time that, these markets is the traders that really move it. The people that actually use these commodities
they don't get to move anything.
Exactly. So at the end of the day, it's Wall Street and, these traders, taking advantage of, what's happening, moving prices and all of that. So we're seeing them sell off, at this point. It happened on Monday. Some analysts said this is just, some said it's a blip, but others were like, this could be a sign of what's to come, with oil at this point. So it remains to be seen. Some are saying oil might get to 60-something dollars
Yeah, I heard
barrel.
That yesterday, that it could be about $65.
Exactly.
And stay there.
And stay there. It's good, for energy prices, but it's bad for us because, we're not getting as much oil out, at this point. So we're not even taking advantage of, higher prices. Then when the price now goes down, it's
we also have revenue difficulties.
Exactly.
These are just add to the economic woes that we already have.
Yeah.
And, yesterday you and I were talking about will we be headed to the IMF like Ghana?
Right, because...
of course, if oil prices drop, that may speed up the necessity for us to do that.
Exactly.
Thank you, Laddie. As usual, there'll be an update of this. Laddie and Ini John McQuarrie of our business desk will bring updates of all this and more stories in the world of business, not only as it relates to the war in Ukraine, but worldwide on Business Morning right after this, and then on Business Incorporated at 1:30. Thanks, Laddie.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at some of the sports news emanating from here. But before that, let's bring you our breaking story once again. We're learning that Prime Minister Boris Johnson is to resign as leader of the Conservative Party later on today, but he will continue as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom until the autumn. Conservative leadership race will take place this summer, and a new Prime Minister is expected to be in place in time for the Tory party conference in October of 2022. An unprecedented barrage of resignations, now numbering over 50 of ministers, junior ministers, and other senior aides, have put the Prime Minister in a fairly untenable position. But he intends to stay at least until October, but is expected to resign later on today as leader of the Conservative Party. And let's take a look at the sports. Ukrainian children have started playing soccer again in a bombed-out stadium outside Kiev, a much-needed distraction from the horrors of war. The Champion Stadium was heavily damaged in the weeks that followed Russia's invasion, when Russian forces reached the outskirts of Ukraine's capital and occupied parts of the city of Irpin. The stadium's walls are still pockmarked with bullet holes, but much of the shrapnel has been cleared away, and holes in the pitch from mortar bombs have been plugged with sand. 26-year-old Danilo Kessel, a coach at the stadium and director of the Olympic Irpin team, took part in the cleanup. Asked how he felt when he welcomed the children back to training, Mr. Kessel said, "I needed to show everything was fine on the outside so the kids wouldn't feel my emotional exhaustion." The European Table Tennis Union has confirmed it will not accept clubs from Russia and Belarus for the 2022-23 continental season, meaning they cannot play in competitions such as the European Champions League. Fears were also raised that if Russian and Belarusian clubs were included, other nations would boycott. This is in response to the country's involvement in the invasion of Ukraine. The European Table Tennis Union had already banned the national teams from both countries too, in line with sanctions implemented by the International Table Tennis Federation. And just before we go, Lithuanians gathered in the northern town of Siliwa to see a Turkish-made drone set to be sent to Ukraine after a crowdfunding campaign. Thousands gathered at the military airfield to see the Bayraktar TB2 combat drone adorned with the logo of a hawk and Lithuanian and Ukrainian colors. Lithuanian crowdfunded almost 6 million euros in small donations in May for the drone, following which Turkish manufacturer Bayraktar donated it instead. Lithuania's government is committed to spending 1.5 million euros of the crowd-funded money to arm the drone. The remainder will go towards humanitarian help for Ukraine. Thanks for being with us. That's our program this morning. My name is Ladi Akiri. There's an update on the world today at 5 o'clock. Do watch out for that. But for now, you go out there and have yourselves a good Thursday.